So, academic writing is weird and it's hard. Okay, let's have a look. I argued on Tuesday that I gave 5 arguments. Firstly, I said there's no such thing as academic writing per se, which is a bit contradictory when you're in a Zoom session specifically about academic writing. But the reason I argued that there's no such thing as academic writing is that I put the position that in fact academic writing differs so fundamentally from discipline to discipline that if I opened a maths article and put it next to a physics article and then put that next to a philosophy article, you wouldn't even consider them the same genre. They would be as far apart as each one is different to a poem or to technical instructions on how to use a washing machine. Yet we call those all academic writing. So I think that's our first misunderstanding, that there's such a thing as academic writing. But in fact, what there is different forms of knowledge creation and therefore different forms of knowledge dissemination. The second thing I argued on Tuesday was that academic writing often seems very mysterious. And I think as academics, we don't do a very good job of making it clear to our students how and why we write in our disciplines and how each discipline writes differently and why that is. So we don't make it very clear as to how we write. Why do we reference in that way? Why is this considered a valuable argument but that isn't? Why is this considered a good research question but that one isn't? Why are these people being referenced and those people aren't? We don't make that kind of stuff very explicit, so it's not surprising our students often find it a bit mysterious. And what I've tried to argue on Tuesday is that the seeming mystery of the ways of writing actually emerged from the fact that different disciplines have got kind of different values. They've got different intentions. They've got a different sense of what is truth and what is reality. And that is why they write differently. The other thing I argued on Tuesday was that most of these weird things about academic writing come from the fact that we are trying to do something value-laden. We are trying to make a particular form of knowledge, and that leads to different ways of writing. But I also conceded, and I don't want to deny this fact, that some parts of academic writing are pretentious and exclusionary nonsense. And we really need to get good at identifying what is necessary. And we need to get good, those of us in the room that are academics, we need to get good at explaining to our students why we write in these particular ways. And we also need to get good at admitting that some of it is, well, history, tradition, exclusionary nonsense. I'm seeing quite a lot of comments about getting the slides and it being recorded. Yes, indeed, all CPGS seminars are recorded and they get put up on the YouTube channel. And I will send you that link to everyone who signed up for this session, along with the PowerPoint. So the big difference between bullet number 3 and bullet number 4, that some aspects are necessary because of the nature of the knowledge, bullet number 3, versus some aspects are nonsense and just come from the histories of universities, the big difference between them takes a bit of identifying. So although I'm always appreciative of young academics, novice academics who come in ready to change the discipline, to rock the boat and bring about necessary transformation, I really appreciate those voices and I think they're necessary. I also think that, that if you are one of those young voices, you need to be aware that, hang on, some of the stuff that's happened, that has developed over these years, is there for good reason. And it's quite a challenge to tell the difference. Of course, the real challenge is not to become so used to the norms and values of a discipline that you can no longer rock the boat. And then finally, I argued on Tuesday that anyone can get good at academic writing. And it's this last point that I'm going to be focusing on today. This idea that anyone can get good at academic writing. And I can already hear some of your little voices in your heads. And the reason I can hear them is not because I'm psychic, but because I hear them too. And that is not me. I'm probably not going to get good at it, or I'll be good enough maybe, but not great. I'm not a good academic writer. Some of you may be suffering even from impostor syndrome. you kind of wonder how you got to where you got to. How am I a postgraduate student? How am I a postgraduate supervisor? Sooner or later, they're going to find out that I'm not really good enough, that I don't really belong here. And every time you get any negative feedback or reviews, you probably feel that, you see, it's true. I don't belong here. I'm not good enough. And you don't recognize those kind of feedback as actually part of the knowledge production process, because it reinforces that negative voice. So those of you who do suffer from that imposter syndrome, that fear that you are an imposter, you don't really belong, and you're going to be found out, I'm going to try in the next little bit to convince you that in fact academic writing is not something that belongs to only the few, only the elite, that in fact academic writing is simply the dissemination of knowledge, and that knowledge can and should belong to anyone who is able, through both time and resources, to be educated within a particular field. So let me unpack that a little bit. First task I want you to do is I'm going to put you into breakout groups. If you aren't familiar with breakout groups before, you don't need to know anything. I'm sorry if you can hear my little dog whining in the background. It's suddenly got chilly and he's letting me know that he's a bit cold. So as soon as I've put you in the breakout groups, I'll wrap him in a blanket and that will hopefully keep him quiet for a bit. He's an old boy and he feels the cold. Okay, back to this task, breakout groups. So I'm going to put you into breakout groups. You'll be in small breakout groups of just 2 or 3 people, or at the most 4 people. So you'll soon see on your screen the breakout group. You'll only go into that breakout group for 10 minutes. And what I want you to do, and Patrick, he thought it was his stomach making those noises. Well, that's why I explained it was my dog. I thought, if any of you think, what the heck are those noises? I thought I'd better just explain it's my dog. You know, a lot of academic writing, we focus so much on the technical skills or the content, the mathematics or the physics or the chemistry or the philosophy or what it is, that we very rarely acknowledge the extent to which it can be emotional. It can be scary, it can be something that you find daunting, that it does in fact affect your identity, because you spend a lot of time sort of crafting an argument, and when your supervisor gives you feedback saying, oh, this is unclear, I don't know what you're trying to say here, it can feel like a blow to yourself. And I think what I want to begin with today is to just take a few minutes to consider the fact that it is affective, it is emotional, that writing can in fact be an issue of your identity. In those groups, I'm going to ask you to chat. You'll be able to unmute your microphones. And if you don't have a microphone, you can still use your little chat bar within your small groups of just 2 or 3 people. And these are the 2 questions I'm going to ask you to chat for, just for 10 minutes. And after the 10 minutes, you don't need to keep time, because when the 10 minutes are up, you'll be thrown back into this main room. I want you to discuss these 2 questions with whoever you find yourself in a room with. And that is, what piece of academic writing are you most proud of? I think we often focus only on the negative, and in fact that's what I've been saying. I've been talking about imposter syndrome and feeling daunted and feeling scared, but sometimes we get it right and we feel, hey, I can't believe I wrote that. That's really cool. What piece of academic writing are you most proud of? It might be an assignment you wrote, a chapter of a thesis, it might be a journal article. What was it? I'd like you to share that with whoever you're in the room with. And then overall, dominant emotions. What are your main emotions? How do you generally feel about academic writing? If you think about academic writing as an activity, what sort of springs to mind? So those are the tasks that I'm going to ask you. That's the conversation that I'm going to ask you to have. I wonder if you are willing in the chat bar to let me know, just with a word or 2, what emotions does academic writing conjure up for you? Of course, given what I said on Tuesday, academic writing is different in every discipline. So for some of you, academic writing is about writing a thesis to get a qualification. Some of you, it's writing a journal article. So what are the feelings? We've got scared, out of your depth, anxiety, difficult, defensiveness, confusion, inadequacy, proud when it's done. Yes, sense of fear, agony, intimidating, challenging, exciting, stressful, procrastination. That's an interesting one. I definitely suffer from that. Procrastination until the thing is so darn overdue that I'm forced to do it. Overwhelmed and anxious, anxiety and stress, but pride when you master it. A roller coaster, so there's good and bad. Excitement and then doubt. A bit of rebellion. I like that idea. I actually think that that's quite helpful to have a bit of rebellion about the conventions of academic writing. Because I think if you feel that the rules of academic writing are there to be obeyed at all time and are imposed from on high, it can actually stop you from writing at all. It can stop you from getting going. Paralysis, analysis paralysis. So there's all sorts of different issues that are going on there, but I don't need to be much of a discourse analyst to figure out that there's overwhelmingly a sense of difficulty. So I'm going to whiz through a few slides over the next few minutes in the hopes that I can diminish at least some of that feeling of stress and despondency, and let's see how it goes. Some of you have been in my workshops before. You'll hear me saying the same thing over and over again. I don't think that's a bad thing. I have to say the same thing over and over again to myself when I find myself going off track and bringing about the kind of common sense understandings of writing that all the research that I've done and that I've read over the years about academic knowledge dissemination and about academic writing tell us quite the opposite. A lot of our common sense understanding of writing is the opposite of what the research tells us. And even though I'm exposed to that research, I often slip into those, I think, fairly dangerous common sense understandings. So I need to hear this myself saying this as well. So academic writing, I think it's important to think about it as a disciplinary conversation, to think about it as participating. And there are some places where taking part in a conversation can be very scary. You know, if you suddenly find yourself at the head table of some fancy event and everyone else there seems to you at least to be far more knowledgeable and far more important, it can be quite scary to participate in that conversation. There are other conversations where you feel very relaxed with a bunch of friends and you're quite happy to try out an opinion and see what they say. So the fact that we think of it as a conversation is not to undermine that it can be stressful, but to really have an idea of give and take, and to have an idea that when you're disseminating knowledge in the academy, you're participating in a conversation that's been going on for some time. So you've got to figure out the conversation before you butt in with your ideas. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of reading and writing and reading and writing and reading and writing. You need to know what are the current concepts in the field. You should be able to map these out on a piece of paper. What are the current methodologies? You don't have to agree with any of them, but you need to have a sense of them. You need to have a sense of how things have been done. In some fields, there's far more agreement, typically in the natural sciences. There's far more agreement about how knowledge should be constructed or discovered and how it should be reported and disseminated. And in other fields, particularly humanities, there's a whole lot of contestation about every aspect of knowledge creation. What counts as truth, how we should write about it, what counts as a claim, what counts as evidence, what counts as a suitable research problem. So some conversations are more, what can we say, fractious than others, but in all disciplines there are conversations taking place, and finding out what those conversations are takes time. So you need to give yourself time. Sometimes that can feel overwhelming. I'm trying to do my master's. I need to get it done in 2 years or 3 years. How am I going to do that if I've got to find out a few hundred years worth of conversation? Well, of course, you're never going to be able to do that. As Kirsten said in her session on literature reviews the other day, which is now up on the YouTube channel, you aren't going to be able to read everything on your topic, but you need to have read enough to have a general sense of the current conversation, the kind of, what are the current debates? And of course, for every reading, there must be a writing. I say that over and over again. Reading and reading and reading can start to give you a sense of what other people are saying and who the other people are that are inhabiting this particular field. But you want to become an active member of that field. So you need to be writing for yourself every time you do a reading, so that you're not just reading in a way of saying, what are the other important people in the field saying? But you're starting to think, well, that's what that dude said. What do I think about what that dude said? And write notes for yourself about that. And that process of writing, reading something and then writing some notes for yourself, I think is very important in the development of voice. It's very important to start thinking about literature in terms of what will that literature do for me? At undergraduate level, I don't think in every program, but I sadly think in many programs, we teach students to read research from the perspective of this is the truth, learn it and tell it back to us. And then it's a big jump at postgraduate level to realize that you're reading to say, these are other people in the field, and I might only be a novice, I might be standing on the outskirts of the field, but I'm actually a member of that field. And so when I start hearing what other people are saying in the conversation, in other words, when I start reading the literature, I need to be reading it in terms of, what do I think about this? Is this important for my study? Is this going to help me? Is this helping me to think in a different way? Is there something here that can help support a particular direction that I'd like to try out? So you're reading it with a very different relationship to the text. You're reading it as a fellow member of the field. Evelyn asks, how much reading is enough? If you're at postgraduate level, one of your key roles of your supervisor is to help guide you to say, do you know enough? Are you aware enough of the conversation? I think it's important in many fields to have an understanding of the key concepts. In humanities and social sciences, that will often be particular people, particular theorists, and particular schools of thought. And you need to show that you've read them and understood them. You do not need to follow them and bow down to them, although you may well choose to use their concepts and extend their concepts. Or you may well want to critique their concepts. But if you're working in a field where a particular theorist or school of thought is quite dominant, it would be a mistake to just ignore it completely. You don't want your examiner or the reviewer of your journal article to think, how is this person writing about power without mentioning Foucault? You don't have to use Foucault, you don't have to agree with Foucault, but you do need to say, hey, I know there's this dude Foucault and his thoughts about power seem to be quite important. This is the reason I'm not using him. Or this is why I'm taking a different stance. Or on curriculum, there's this guy called Bernstein. Most people use Bernstein. This is why I'm not using Bernstein. Or this is why I critique Bernstein. But you can't pretend that those people don't exist. And that's where your supervisor will certainly help you to make sure that you have done that. In the natural sciences, we're less likely to have schools of thought and major theorists, but more likely to have cutting-edge methodologies. And you want to make sure that you are at that cutting edge in terms of particular methods being used. So how do you know that you've got enough? I want to ask you to do a task now. This is just a 3-minute task. I'll give you a countdown, so I'll let you know when the 3 minutes are up. If you've got a pen and paper, I'd like you to open to a new page. If you don't have a pen and paper, can you please just open a Word document while I'm talking? And I want you to put at the top of that page a key concept that you're busy working with. It might be the actual phenomenon you're researching. It could be the name of a methodology. It could be the name of a theory. Any concept that is kind of important. It doesn't have to be the main concept, but it could be. Any concept could be a word, could be a phrase. It could be a theory like Marxism. It could be a method like focus groups. It could be a concept like domestic violence. Whatever a core concept is that you're busy reading and writing about at the moment. I'll give you a few seconds to think of that concept and to write it down at the top of your page. Okay, now what I'm going to ask you to do is to do free writing for 3 minutes. Free writing is non-stop writing. It's only 3 minutes. Your fingers must not stop moving on that keyboard, or must not stop, the pen must not stop moving across the page, and you write as much as you can without any editing, no correcting. Just put words on paper. It doesn't matter spelling, grammar, it doesn't matter what language you write it in. Everything you can think about that concept, defining the concept or whatever you want to say, but for non-stop. That means that if you get stuck and you don't know what else to write, your hand must not stop moving, your fingers must not stop moving on the keyboard. If you get stuck, you can just repeat the last word, 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 until you can think of something else to write. But you need to write non-stop for 3 minutes on that concept you've identified, starting now. Okay, time's up. That was just 3 minutes. I mean, you could have done free writing for 5 minutes, 7 minutes. But it's quite nice to do a bit of free writing every now and again. It only takes a few minutes. It's something I remind myself and I remind my students when they say, oh, I haven't had any time to do writing today. I say, really? You didn't have 3 minutes? Wow, everyone can find 3 minutes. Now, obviously, you're not going to get much writing done in 3 minutes, but I think it's quite good to remind ourselves that we can squeeze bits of writing into different parts of our day. Not ideal. Ideally, we'd be sitting on lovely sabbaticals somewhere near a beach for long walks in the evening. But in the real world, that's often not the case. And in the real world, we often have to squeeze in 3 minutes free writing while we're waiting to pick the kids up from school or whatever. So Evelyn asked, how do we know when we've done enough reading? Well, this is one exercise you can do to find out if you've done enough reading. Are you able to easily write non-stop for a good few minutes to explain a concept without going back to all the readings? Are you able to explain your concepts in quite accessible terms? Are you able to teach those concepts to someone? Once you can do that, you're probably ready to write about them for a reader. But until you do that, you probably haven't, if you start writing for 5 or 7 minutes, free writing, and you kind of get stuck and you can't really explain the concept, you probably haven't understood it well enough. You probably need to go back and do some more reading. But of course, for every reading, there must be a writing. So it's that movement between reading and writing for yourself, writing badly, writing scribbled, reading, writing, until you have a sense of confidence and ready to write for someone else. I've got this short little video. You probably have seen from the Tuesday that there's a lot of the videos that I've made and that colleagues of mine have made. We've put on the Enhancing Postgraduate Environments website. You'll see the references at the end of this slideshow. I'm showing you this one particular little video. It's a very short video. It's only 2 minutes. There's a whole lot of 2-minute tip videos that I made, which are very much looking at writing. I'm not going to show you all of them. I'm just going to show you one of them now. And it's about this idea of joining a conversation. Some of you are going to be data, and some of you are going to be doing experiments in the laboratory. But all of you will be disseminating your knowledge in order to share it with others. I find it really helpful to think about dissemination as joining a conversation. When you enter a room and you find a bunch of people standing around talking, you don't just barge in and start talking, do you? Well, not if you want to have any friends, you don't. It's far more likely that you take your time. You'd listen to find out what the topic of conversation is. You'd figure out what's already been said about the issue and where the conversation's going. And only when you have a pretty good sense of what's happening in the conversation would you venture to join in. And even then, you would only join in if you had something to contribute. This is exactly the same as we do in knowledge creation and academic writing. Before you can launch in and share what you've been up to and what your current thinking is, you need to spend a fair amount of time immersing yourself in the literature. You need to know what the current debates around your chosen phenomenon are. You need to know what has been said before on the issue and what are the most up-to-date theories, methods, and explanations. When you join the conversation, you don't have to agree with everyone in the room. You can raise something that none of them have thought about, and you can even challenge what someone else has said. But when you challenge someone in a conversation, you don't do it in a rude or dismissive way, unless you're spoiling for a fight. Again, it's just the same in academic writing. We position our contribution within the ongoing conversation in the field, and we may well disagree with some of what has come before, but we do so in a careful, rigorous, and collegial way, following the knowledge production norms of the discipline. If we simply dismiss what has come before in a rude way, or without any clearly articulated explanations for dismissing it, we're very unlikely to get our contribution published or taken seriously. The idea of knowledge dissemination as joining a conversation has a lot of implications. It means that we have to read quite a bit before we can get going sharing our own views. It also means that we need to be able to show how our contribution builds on or contradicts the work that has come before us. And it means that when it comes to publication, we should be selecting the target journal according to where the conversation is taking place. Good grief, that was loud. Okay, so in that video, and there's a whole lot of other little videos like that looking at writing, that one is the introductory one, but there's a few others that talk about when you should use direct quotes or indirect quotes and so on and so forth. I don't know what that I looked like on your screen, but on my screen I looked like I had serious sunstroke in that video. I've never seen myself looking quite so bright red, but anyway, don't know what happened there. I don't really look like that, by the way. So this slide, I think, is probably the core message I'd like to go through this afternoon. And this is the idea that writing generally happens over 3 phases. Now, of course, in any slide or illustration, it looks like it's 1, 2, and 3. I've even numbered it 1, 2, and 3 with arrows going in one direction. And that's the ideal, but in reality, we often go 1, 2, 2.5, back to 1.5, then to 2, then 2.5, and so on and so forth. But I would argue that many novice academic writers make the mistake of collapsing 2 and 3, and they leave out number 1 entirely. So let me go through these 3 phases, which, by the way, there's been a lot of research, largely done by EMEG, Albo and company. These pieces of research have been duplicated in various settings across different disciplines. And it's found that different disciplines write, as I argued, fundamentally differently. And when hundreds of very prolific academic writers were interviewed, they didn't have any similarities in terms of sort of, oh, you must write first thing in the morning, or you must write after a long walk, or you must write 1,000 words a day. Or there was no similarities. There was very idiosyncratic, and people wrote in very different ways. But there did seem to be this notion of kind of 3 overlapping phases seem to be common across faculties when we look at what it is that very prolific academic writers do. And the thing they do at the beginning is that they write quite casually. When they set out to write something, they're very non-judgmental. They're just scribbling stuff for themselves. They sort of trying to get, well, I say they tackle the quantity and the quality will follow. They don't worry about the quality. They don't worry about writing neatly or making much sense, because they're actually scribbling it all down for themselves to figure out what they think. They're using writing as part of their thinking process. Now, that might look very different in different disciplines. In some disciplines, it's rambling little scribbled notes in a laboratory logbook. In others, it's a research journal kept in the form of a diary. It may look different in different disciplines. Some people, I've had students, I don't know if Sharon's in the room because I know she's quite ill at the moment, but no, she's not here. But I know Sharon Clarence, one of my PhD students, she kept a research journal that I swear you could have framed. You could have taken a photocopy of any of the pages and framed it, because it was beautifully illustrated with lots of different color text and very organized. My own pre-writing phase 1 are usually scribbled on the backs of used bits of paper, on till slips. I lose half of them. I'm exceedingly disorganized, but I do a lot of pre-writing. I do often think of something and then quickly jot it down somewhere. Of course, I can't immediately lose that piece of paper, but there's something about writing down the idea that allows me to think through that idea in writing. And the research seems to suggest that prolific academic writers do a heck of a lot of that writing. Writing that is not towards a product. They're not sitting down to write an article or to write a chapter or to write a proposal for a study. They are just writing their thoughts. They're writing about what they've read. They're writing to work something out. It might be a mathematical formula that they're doodling. It might be a free writing paragraph, but they're just writing. Lots and lots of writing. No judgment. And I think that we don't spend enough time making this explicit to our students. So for any supervisors in the room, I think in many ways we train our students, certainly for myself as an undergraduate student, I would sit down and write the assignment, so usually an hour or two before the assignment was due. And I'd start at the beginning of the assignment and I'd write to the end of the assignment. And I wouldn't spend much time sort of just scribbling, just toying with the ideas for that assignment, just figuring out what I thought, making sense of the readings I'd done through writing. Not at all. I'd sit down and write the product. And so basically I was jumping to phase 2 instead of spending time on phase 1. And that actually stronger writers spend a lot more time on phase 1, writing for themselves, messy writing, incoherent writing, than they do in phases 2 and 3. And because we jump to phase 2 instead of spending time on phase 1, I think our students often present to us kind of garbled thoughts that aren't very coherent. And it's because they haven't given themselves that messy space to figure out their thoughts. And instead they present that to us. So when you move to phase 2, you have to put on a very different hat to phase 1. Phase 1 is anything goes, be kind to yourself, be generous, be creative, be experimental. Phase 2 is, who is my reader? I need to think about them. Are they going to understand this? Will they see why I'm jumping to this next point? Will they make the connection to this next sentence? Is my argument clear to them? Are they going to be satisfied with this kind of reference? Is this reference strong enough to support the claim I'm making here? Will my reader find a hole in this argument? So phase 2 is very different to phase 1 because it's really thinking clearly about who it is that's reading it. And then phase 3 is the real going through it step by step, spelling, grammar, punctuation. Are my references correct? Phase 3 is important, but it's phase 3. It's not phase 1. I think many of us write a sentence, correct a sentence, craft a sentence, shine a sentence, polish a sentence, move on to the second sentence. So we're trying to merge phases 2 and 3. And as supervisors, we sometimes do that too. We're giving phase 3 kind of feedback on a phase 2 document. In other words, we're correcting spelling and grammar and punctuation when really the student hasn't yet got the coherence and the concepts clear. And so we're polishing something that doesn't yet have substance and coherence. And instead, the student needs feedback to help them craft their argument, to start to understand the way in which we make knowledge in our particular field. And they need feedback along that. So there you go. I mean, how simple is that? It's on one slide. It's you know, there's so much evidence, there's so much research that backs this up. As I said, it's not 1 and then 2 and then 3. In fact, often you might be in phase 3 in one chapter where you're just doing the real nice polishing, but on another chapter you're still busy reading and figuring out what you want to say. So you're in phase 1. Another section you might be in phase 2 where you're thinking about who's my reader and how can I put it together. Sometimes you might get to phase 2 and then realize I don't really understand this concept well enough to be explaining it to a reader. I better go back to phase 1 and do some more reading and writing for myself. So it's not quite as clear as it's put out here. But I'd like to suggest that this slide is actually all you need to know about academic writing. It's simple to put on a slide and it's bloody difficult to implement. So phase 1 is about writing for yourself. You figure out what you think through writing. So you're not judging yourself. You're not trying to write prettily. You're not trying to write academically. You're not trying to write in fancy words. You're trying to write to say, what the heck do I think? What the heck does this mean? What do I feel about that article? What do I want to do with this piece of writing? And at this stage, you've got to build your writing muscles. I spoke to you on Tuesday, those of you who were with us on Tuesday, about that PhD student of mine, Sarah, who was a Comrades runner. And when I said that was awesome, she was saying, no, it's not awesome. I'm a Comrades runner because I get up every morning and I run for 2 hours before I go to work. And I train when it's raining, and I train when it's cold, and I train when it's dark. That's how I'm a Comrades runner. And it just struck me that that's how you're a good academic writer. You're not a cleverer, I hate to say it. I'm sure some of you are very, very clever indeed, but I'm of the opinion that you don't have to be that clever to be good at academic writing. You just need to do a lot of it, give yourself permission to, or make space to do a lot of it, make space in your life, and that you get better and better at it. It's a social practice, so you've got to practice it. And there's that lovely quote, I should have put it on this slide because I'm never going to remember it exactly, but this whole idea that, you know, when you hit a snag with a piece of writing, you often think, oh, I don't know what I'm doing with this, and you put it off, you procrastinate, you leave it, and you leave it for a few days. And it grows and grows and grows in your head till it becomes terrifying to get back to it. It turns into a monster. Whereas if you kept visiting it every day, you'll keep it tame, even if you don't do much. If you go back and visit that piece of writing every day and you just idly read through what you've been writing or do another reading and scribble a few notes, even if you only manage to do that for 25 minutes a day, it just keeps that piece of writing tame, and it stops it growing into this monstrous beast in your head that you are terrified to get back to. And then, I know this sounds twee, and I know I said it on Tuesday, but the only way to good writing is through bad writing. You genuinely have to be willing to write badly if you want to write well, because to build those writing muscles, you've got to be able to do it badly. I'm quite sure Sarah's didn't become a Comrades Marathon runner by getting up and running a Comrades Marathon. You know, you start off walking around a field once. You start off, maybe you need a coach to help you. Maybe you need good running shoes. Maybe you're able to run 200 meters before you start panting. But if you did that every day, you'll probably find at the end of the week you can run 250 meters. And maybe you do need 2 days break, otherwise you're going to get ankle injuries or so on. And the same is true with writing. Having a space, having a break is a good thing. But having a break for too long where it turns into a beast, that is not a good thing at all. So I think that pre-writing is underemphasized, but I think it's key to academic writing. So pre-writing is writing for yourself. Nobody else sees that pre-writing. It's not meant to be pretty. So some examples of pre-writing are what we just did, free writing. It could be keeping a reading journal. On the EPE website, the website address again is postgradenvironments.com, postgradenvironments.com. If you just do a Google for reading, if you just do a search for reading journal, there's Sharon Clarence made a lovely video on keeping a reading journal, which is where you write notes for yourself on every reading in your journal, but it's not where you try and, you know, highlight, underline, catch the key phrases. Instead, it's very much just, what do I feel about this article? How is it useful for me? And so on. Keeping a logbook. Oh, and the stats journal. That was interesting to me. Jeremy Baxter from Statistics Department ran a seminar for us a little while ago. And he was saying he keeps a stats journal when he's working in a new field. So he has a look at what statistical analyses did they do in each study and why. And he just writes notes for himself on that to help guide his decisions about which statistical analyses to do. And a research journal, like a diary, doodling and mind mapping. Some people just, you know, like visual representation of ideas and how things connect together. Audio recordings are really good as well. I do think writing is a bit different from keeping a record. But sometimes, you know, as you're walking somewhere, you get an idea and you want to test it out by talking it through. I find it sometimes helps just to record that on my phone. If you've got dogs, they're very good listeners. My dogs listen to me when I explain things to them. So they're much more interested in what I have to say, and they're much more patient than my husband, who really couldn't care less about many of the academic things that make my heart sing. So do lots and lots and lots of writing for yourself. Writing for others, so that's phase 2. Once you're ready to make the move, in other words, you're at the end of phase 1 and you've done lots of writing and you really understand the particular argument or the particular concept or the particular, it could be just a short section, but you really feel, I know what I want to write in this section. I've done stacks and stacks of bad writing for myself and I've got a handle on it and I'm now ready to write it for someone else. That's where you need to really think, who is this someone else? Because now I need to put them in front of me and write for them. And so I actually tell my students to imagine your reader. Spend a bit of time imagining who your reader is and sit them down in front of you and write your text and then read it aloud to them. Sit them in front of you. If you need to, even pull up an empty chair next to you and conjure them up with your imagination and read your piece aloud to them and imagine them interrupting you and going, hang on a moment, what about this? Or I don't understand what you mean about that. Or why are you suddenly telling me about this new thing? I thought we were talking about that other thing. So imagine them interrupting you, as we would do with a conversation, to get you to explain things. And that'll help you to realize where you need to go back and what we famously call unpack. You know, supervisors always say unpack. which basically means you've given us a word or a phrase which is semantically dense. It's full of all sorts of meaning, and you need to explain that to us. So who is the reader? If you're writing a journal article, you need to have a sense of who that journal article gets read by. Read the scope or aims of the journal article. Read some previous articles from that particular journal. You need to have a sense of who are you talking to, because you want to talk to them in a way that makes sense. Is it a very specialist journal? In which case you don't need to explain all the terms and methods that everyone in the field uses. Or is it a very general journal? Are you writing, especially education journals, they're typically read by people who are educationalists across a variety of different fields, in which case you really need to explain a lot of stuff. You can't take any of your terminology for granted. How international is that journal? Can I say, for example, in South Africa, can I say University of Technology? Yeah, I can in South Africa, but if I'm writing in an international journal, no, I need to explain that term. Even a term like matric. You probably either have to explain what matric means or replace it with school leaving examination. So think about who your readers are. Your thesis readership, if those of you who are writing a thesis, who is your reader? Because when you get into phase 2 of the writing, you've got to keep your reader in mind and make sure that they're happy. Make sure that whatever questions jump into their mind get answered in the very next sentence. Your thesis reader is not your supervisor. Your supervisor is your guide. They're your first critical reader. They will give you feedback to try and help you prepare your text for your reader. So you don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh, well, I'm writing, Sue understands this, or Sue's the one who explained this to me, so I don't need to explain it in my text, because if I'm your supervisor, you're not writing for me. I will be your critical reader, but I'm trying to help you prepare it for your examiners. And yes, we hope that other people will read your thesis as well, not just your examiners. But those of you who are busy with masters and PhDs, you can block your ears for the next 10 seconds while I point out that masters and PhD theses are read by about 5 or 6 people. That's your supervisor, your examiners, and your mother. And that's why you should try and get some publications if you've got something valuable to share. So really your reader is probably examiners. And if you're in a highly specialized unidisciplinary field like abstract mathematics, then you probably can assume that all of your examiners will be specialists in that field. And so you can have a lot more shared expectations or expectations of shared understandings. But if you're in a generalist field, or if you're doing transdisciplinary studies, you need to be aware that you may well have one examiner who's a specialist on your phenomenon, another examiner who's a specialist on your methodology. So when you discuss the literature on the phenomenon, the methodology examiner won't know anything about that phenomenon. So you really need to unpack it. And when you get to the methodology, your phenomenon expert won't know about the methodology. So you need to explain the methodology and justify why you chose that methodology. So you need to imagine that reader and craft your text for them. And keep asking yourself, will the reader understand this concept? Will the reader understand why I'm now moving to a new section? Or do I need to add a sentence explaining how this last paragraph now moves to the next paragraph, and so on. And then finally, phase 3 is the proofreading. Phase 3. Not phase 1, not phase 2, certainly not phase 1. Phase 1 is just write randomly for yourself. Phase 2 is think carefully about my reader and make it clear to my reader. Phase 3 is let's polish this thing now. Let's sort out the tenses, the references, the spelling, the grammar. You do need to get this proofreading right. People often misunderstand me when I tell supervisors, don't correct the spelling and grammar. They misunderstand me as saying spelling and grammar is not important. It's hugely important, but you only worry about it at the end. Because in fact, there's a lot, especially if you're dealing with students who are writing in a language that is not their home language. Because we know that when you're dealing with conceptual complexity, your language goes out the window. I know that for myself. My own sentence structure, I become having these long run-on sentences because I haven't quite understood what I'm writing about yet. And it's only when I've really understood the coherence that I can get on with the proofreading. And the proofreading is important, but it comes at the end. It's very important because people judge us on this. I know as an examiner, even though I know all this literature about how irrelevant in many ways the spelling and grammar and punctuation is, I know that as an examiner, if I open a thesis I've got to examine and the abstract has got 3 or 4 spelling errors in it, I'm not very well inclined towards the rest of the thesis. It's going to have to do a heck of a job to change my opinion, because my initial opinion is, sure, this person hasn't put much effort in. They don't really care. If they're shoddy with the spelling and grammar, they're probably shoddy with the methodology and their findings and so on. So it is important. I think it's worthwhile getting to know some citation software. Any new software is always a headache, but it's one of the big issues with proofreading is people not using citation software. So references stay in the thesis that aren't in the end, or that stay in the references at the end, but they weren't in the thesis. I use PaperPal on Google Docs. I must say I love it, but whichever one you use, Mendeley, Zotero, RefWorks, EndNote, whatever you use, I think it's worth learning some citation software. Give yourself a nice break from reading articles and writing stuff. Give yourself a break by going and watching some YouTube videos on the citation software you use. And then Bongile has just jumped ahead of me, because indeed, my very next point, Grammarly. I love Grammarly. I know not everyone loves it. Grammarly is a piece of software, I think one of the most sophisticated pieces of software that checks your grammar and helps you with long sentences and so on. The important thing is not to agree with everything Grammarly suggests. And actually before that, the most important thing is to make sure you've set Grammarly to the language you're using. And remember, there's no such thing as English. There's Australian English, there's UK English, there's American English. I don't know why it doesn't offer us South African English. I'm sorry about that. But I choose UK English. And that is different spelling and different so on. Grammarly is available to all Rhodes University students and postgrad students and staff. So if you don't have Grammarly, I strongly suggest you download it. I use it a lot. Don't agree with everything it suggests though, so just be aware, sometimes it offers some odd advice, but I find it very useful. And then of course, wherever you are, if you're using Microsoft Word, spell check. If you don't know how to make sure how you use spell check, there's a YouTube video for that. There's a YouTube video for everything. Yes, Florence, Mendeley, perfectly good. Any of these citation software. Cite this for me. Oh, okay, I don't know that one. So yeah, please, what I'm showing here, I think, is also that the technology can almost do it for us now. Not quite, it's not 100% there yet, but it kind of reinforces my message, which is that the spelling, grammar, and punctuation is not the intellectual work. The intellectual work is coming to grips with the concepts and presenting it in a way that will make sense to the reader. That's the intellectual work. And if you can afford to, you can pay someone. So again, it shows you it's not very intellectual if it's something you can just pay someone else to do. But beware the scam artists. I've had a few students who've paid a fortune. I had one PhD student last year who paid 8,000 Rand to get her thesis, maybe more than that, maybe 12,000 Rand to get her thesis proofread, and it was riddled with spelling and grammar errors afterwards. So be very careful, make sure you've got some references for whoever you use before you pay over the money. And if you can't afford to pay someone to do your proofreading for you, ask your colleagues, ask your friends, pay some bribes, tell them you'll make some pineapple beer for them if you're South African. Right, let's go into the breakout groups again just for a few more minutes. I'm probably over time, as I always am. No, we've got a bit more time. I'm going to put you into your breakout groups again, and I want you to answer 2 questions. Oh, 3 questions. Do you do enough pre-reading and writing? So chat about what I've been saying about these different phases. Do you, because my experience is that people don't spend enough time on phase 1. Do you do enough of phase 1? How can you instill enjoyment in academic writing? Is there anything you can do to bring back the fun moments? Not that it's always going to be fun, but there should be moments of aha and oh wow. What can you do to bring those moments back? And then, most importantly, the third one, what can you do this week to improve your academic writing? It's a tough one. I'm going to suggest that this week ends on Saturday afternoon. Because often when we, in these kinds of workshops, we think about the long term, oh yeah, I should do this in the future, next month. Or like a diet, I'll start on Monday. You don't specify which Monday. I'd like to suggest you need to do something now. Don't make it a huge goal, but perhaps 25 minutes. Perhaps I'm going to do free writing every morning. Perhaps I'm going to do a reading tomorrow and write some notes on it. Make it a small, doable goal. If I put you in your groups, 3 things. Do you do enough of the pre-writing and reading? How can you bring about enjoyment? And what can you do this week? Okay, off you go to your rooms. You should see them visible on your screen now. And you should be able to pop into them. Those of you who joined later, you may find that you weren't in the earlier group. Don't fear, because I will add you to a group now. If you found that you can't see it on your screen, oh, I've got quite a lot of you not assigned. Okay, don't worry, I'll join you, I'll put you in groups. If you can't see on your screen where it's inviting you to join a group, it means you might need to just close something or reduce something on your screen. It might be hiding the invitation. I am moving you as quickly as I can. There's a few of you that don't have groups yet. Please have a look on your screens, and you should see an invitation to join a group. If you get added to a group, you can always just leave it if you didn't want to go to a group. Sorry, I'm still adding. I've still got 5 people left to add. If I've put you in a group and you'd rather just stay here, you can find there's a link to just leave a group. Martha, you don't want to be in a group, eh? Let me leave you there. Okay, those of you that can still hear me, you should have been added to a group. If you want to go and join the group, you certainly don't have to. But if you want to go and join the group, you can look around on your screen and you should see an invitation to join a group. If you don't want to join, you can stay where you are. They're only going to be in the group for 5 minutes. What I want to ask you to do, I'm very aware that I've got literally 10 minutes left, and I still wanted to do like a million other things, but that's par for the course. But perhaps what I can ask you to do is to pop into the chat anything that you thought was particularly useful or interesting that you might like to share. You know, I think it's really good to think about enjoyment in academic writing. It might be rare, but when those moments come, it's something quite wonderful. Or perhaps it's some advice on what your intention was in terms of this week, what you're planning to do. So perhaps you could pop some things into the chat while I finish off. Of course, I really would have liked to have got more into this issue about plagiarism and voice. I think I might actually have a whole session on this at another stage. But all I really want to say is that voice is about presenting your reader with a position. We call that an argument. Unfortunately, the word argument also has an English meaning, to have a fight. So that's not very helpful. But an argument in academia means to take a position, to present a case to your reader for the position. And that case is normally presented in the form of sort of, you make a claim and you give some evidence for that claim, and you make a claim and you give some evidence for that claim, and you make a claim and you give some evidence for that claim. And that builds up to say, okay, dear reader, this is what you need to understand. This is the take-home message. This is what I want to convince you of. And we call that an argument. The word thesis, actually, if you look up the meaning of the word thesis in a dictionary, it's got two meanings. Firstly, it means a dissertation, like a master's dissertation or PhD's dissertation. And the second meaning of the word thesis is argument, to take a position. So your thesis is an argument. And that is voice. So voice is not first person telling about your experience. I think that's often a misunderstanding, is that people think voice is, oh, I think this, or I believe this, or I argue this. Sad to say, what you think or believe or argue has little value in most fields of academia. So you've got to present a case that is convincing to your reader beyond your views and your feelings and your thoughts. So when a sentence starts, I think, I believe, I'd like to say that your reader will think, yeah, well, okay, that's what you think, but why should I think that? This is not a dinner party where you'll be sharing our thoughts. This is an academic argument where you're presenting a case. And so voice is really about presenting a case. And in some disciplines, that might be in the first person. You might be able to say, I interviewed 6 people. This is how I chose the people, and I found, but in some it might be in third person. 5 milliliters were added. But it's still voice, because it's still you presenting a case that convinces your reader. Now, I put plagiarism and voice together, and I'm going to end off now. We will do a separate session on plagiarism another stage. But I put those together because I think that people get the two quite confused. And I think it's because in the academy, we tell students to reference to avoid plagiarism. And I think that's very problematic. I don't think that's why we reference at all. Well, that's a lie. I think we do reference to avoid plagiarism. But I would say that's not why we reference. It just happens to be one of the benefits of referencing. The reason why we reference is because we're joining a conversation and we want to show a familiarity with that conversation. We also want to make sure that when we make a claim, people take it seriously, not because I feel or I think or I argue, but because look at the names and brackets after I've made the claim. Those are references to peer-reviewed texts in the field. So I'm putting those names and brackets to make sure that you, dear reader, take my voice seriously, my claim. I'm claiming that the titration of nanoparticles has increased. I've just made up that statement. I have no idea what it means. But let's say the titration of nanoparticles has increased. And your reader goes, oh, really? Who says? And then you have in brackets, Gruber 2017, Kavanaugh 2018, close brackets. Oh, so the titration has increased because those are the names in brackets that are supporting what this author has said. Got it. So that's why we reference. We reference to substantiate our claims so that what we say is taken seriously, and we reference to show what conversation we're participating in. And for that reason, you wouldn't want to plagiarize because you want to show an awareness of the conversation. But I'll speak more about that another time. I'm going to end now. I would like to recommend that you watch this video. It's also on the postgradenvironments.com website. If you just go to postgradenvironments.com and do a little search, there's a search icon at the top. Do a search for Turnitin. You'll be able to get to this video. I love Turnitin. I use Turnitin a lot, but unfortunately, many, dare I say most, academics do not understand what Turnitin is, and it's led to some serious abuses. It's led to a number of court cases in America, and it's led to a number of American colleges making its use banned by their academics because they don't want to face more court cases. I can talk more about that another day, but you can watch a video. Thank you, everybody, for your time, for your participation. It's really lovely to be with you. I hope that your breakout groups gave you an opportunity to have a conversation with others so that you weren't just sitting and listening to my voice the whole time. And yeah, I just appreciate your company. Keep well, everyone. I will load this onto the CPGS website, and I will send the PowerPoint to everyone who signed up for this session. Keep well and stay safe.